Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming this evening to tonight's Corporate Finance and Property Select Committee. A warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, which is Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Mills and I'm Chairman of tonight's meeting. Details of the business to be considered are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available and accessible online under the live broadcast. For those present and in the room intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder that when speaking, please switch your microphone on. This is the only way that your voice will be audible. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does go off, please follow officers to the fire exits out of the building to the designated meeting points. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to introduce you to the councillors and officers present. So we're joined by Councillor Vanessa Harangi, Councillor Ray Graham, Councillor Farhad Chubadar, Councillor Tony Edgington and Councillor Lindsay Bliss. From officers' perspective this evening, we're joined by Naveed Mohammed, the Head of Business Performance and Insight, Gary Pentecost, Head of Repairs, Engineering, Planned Works and Facilities Management, Ian Waters, Head of Finance, Financial Planning, Capital, Treasury and Systems, and from Democratic Services, Liz Penny. Following those introductions, that brings us on to the agenda for this evening. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Richard Mills, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest in matters coming before us this evening? No, thank you. Agenda item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting that was held on the 3rd of June 2021. Councillor Edgington. Sorry, can you just put the microphone on?
Sorry. On page 4, thank you for that. On page 4, the penultimate paragraph, I think it might be useful to try and clarify what we were talking about there. That it was, I think it was described as customer access. So I think if we confirmed that customer access within the committee's terms of reference encapsulated both physical and online access. Because at the moment it doesn't explain what it is.
Okay, I'm fine with that. If we are happy to amend that. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. That's noted. Thank you.
With that amendment, we're happy to agree those? Councillor Edgington? Sorry, just put your microphone back on, sorry.
I'll learn by the end of next week. Yes, John Wheatley on page 3, there was reference to him that he was going to provide some information and nothing has happened on that.
So just probably a timing overlap. Democratic Services sent something out earlier today on that with an update from him.
Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah,
I know that's only, was it late this afternoon that's come out. So from the minutes perspective, yeah, that has now been sent. The information in it was that, well, members will be able to see it, but he wasn't able to provide too much of an update in terms of some of the parts that we'd asked questions on, which, as yourself and Councillor Lewis alluded to, was probably going to be the case.
Councillor Graham, also you had some queries on it as well, didn't you?
No, I haven't got any.
No, you did. You had some queries for John Wheatley related to the St Andrews.
Oh yes,
the property.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So just
as you say, it was mentioned this afternoon in an addendum. Yeah.
For clarity, Councillor Graham, you didn't have
that's proceeding.
Okay.
So we'll get the feedback later on.
Yeah. For clarity for the meeting, Councillor Graham, you didn't have your microphone on, so just so everyone watching is aware, you made comments in the previous meeting as well on the armed forces engagement. Those have also been responded to in the email that came this afternoon.
Sorry.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? Thank you. Then with those amendments and comments, happy to note those. Agenda item 4 is to confirm that all items before us this evening are part 1 and will therefore be considered in public. Which brings us on to agenda item 5, which is the scoping report for the committee's review into performance monitoring and reporting in the council. Naveed, thank you for joining us this evening. I know you came and spoke with us briefly as a previous committee in a different guise, and I think from that the committee wanted to look into this further. So thank you for your input into the scoping report. I don't know if you wanted to say anything on this, otherwise we could take some. I'll speak further on it after you, if you wanted to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not proposing to go through the paper line by line. It covers some of the material that I touched on when I previously presented to the committee. I'd really like to just draw your attention to page 10 in the pack and the terms of reference, just to make sure that the panel think we've got that kind of geared correctly in terms of what you were hoping for as part of this review. If I could just kind of elaborate on some of those points, it's really to make sure that we can bring to the panel a greater understanding of where we are now, what gets produced, what's the audience, what do they see, the frequency, and how that information is used. Then looking at how we might improve existing practice, so comparing what we do and contrasting it with some peer authorities and also some best practice authorities, both in the local government sector, but also, if we can, in the kind of private sector as well. But also looking at the kind of in the short-term and kind of immediate improvements that we can make as part of that particular process. And I think this is really important, it's really about the future direction, about where we want to go as a local authority. There is discussions and work already away in terms of looking at how we might improve these arrangements, and it's about kind of making sure we get the committee's input into some of that so you can kind of feed back and help shape some of that work going forward. So there are, I'm hoping members have had the opportunity to review the rest of the papers. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take those, but generally if that's the kind of thrust that we would like to take the review with members' permission.
Yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, hopefully members had a chance to review the scoping report. One of the parts I think we can maybe look at is around the evidence and inquiry, just to think about what different witnesses we could have here. So two questions I had was, one, I see that we've got an external consultant engaged currently from MD Key Intelligence. Just an initial question I wanted to ask around that was, what time frame have they been engaged with? Is that a long-standing position or is it a relatively new appointment?
So they've been with us for about 3 months, so still relatively new. Their brief was very much to explore existing arrangements within social care, adults and children's, to understand the current lay of the land, scope out new specifications because of the changing structure and particular programs of work the service are intending to deliver, and then as part of that, look at ways in which we might improve the production and use of data, drawing on newer tools such as Power BI and others. And so that's a piece of work which, in fact, was concluded earlier on today with the kind of presentation to directors.
Okay, thank you. Now, that's useful and good to know that they're sort of a relatively new appointment. I guess my challenge would have been if it had been someone that had been here for a number of years, then to question what the value out of them has been given, where we're sort of looking to address this from. I think the other part was also in terms of officer testimony. I think a large number of the proposed officers is sort of around, like you mentioned, the adult or child safe social care sector. I know there's a representation from housing in there, which I think is good, because I know members talked about that previously as something we wanted to look at, both in terms of not just housing lists and allocating housing, but also in terms of repairs and information around that. The other part I think would be useful in here is something more, on, if I call it under the Resident Services Directive or Director, around the standard things like waste, antisocial behaviour, to get some relevant BI, MI around those. So I think I'd like to be able to take that away from here to look to bring officers in from a wider segment within the organisation if possible. But those are my initial comments. Happy to open up to others. Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, you must have been hearing my conversation earlier, because I did note that all 5 had social care, and in fact, even the one on housing seems to be more to do with homelessness and housing options, which is not generally to do with the repairs side, as far as I'm aware. So yes, it really is quite important that we have a wider range. I think probably looking at the time frame as of the suggested dates and planning, we seem to have a huge number of witnesses on one day, and probably I worked it out that probably 7, maybe 8 even, and that's with only one outside consultant and with maybe somebody from a neighbouring local authority. So I think it would be useful to try and trim down the number of internal, because often, from my experience anyway, that people who are working in a particular organisation tend not to be aware of necessarily of the opportunities which are available in competing or other organisations. I wondered also whether the themes 2 and 3 seem to be very similar to me. What do we need to do better and how, and where do we want to be? Okay, one may be long-term and one might be medium-term, but essentially it's all in the same area. And I wonder if would be some sense in trying to combine those rather than just having 2. And also, on the first one, where are we now? I would be interested to know why we're at the stage we are. What is stopping us at the moment, or has stopped us from going further? It's only a kind of... it's probably something you would be explained anyway, Naveed. But anyway, that was my thought. Incidentally, on page 7, on the information, it's only a minor point, but it does talk about full range of services under the committee's remit are outlined in the terms of reference, but they aren't on this agenda. Well, they weren't on my copy. I don't know.
No, that's okay. I think, yeah.
Apologies, Councillor Egerton. Normally they do actually appear as part of the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
I thought that was automatic almost.
Yes, but you're right. It doesn't appear on this occasion, so apologies for that. Yes, we can rectify that next time.
I think, yeah, just my initial response to those comments, I think they are fair. I think in terms of the officers proposed, to me, I wouldn't expect to use all of them. I think and it's a broad comment, they're all a bit samey. They're in a similar type of sector of the council. That's probably not the right organisational structure, but I think we can get a wider spread within that. Quite possibly, they might be areas where we already have data, which might be why they were selected. For me, that's a non-issue. It's around how can we get a broad approach across the whole council. If we don't have data for some sections, this is where we find out and we work out how to improve it. If we don't have something, then we're approaching this in a very open way in how we can kind of bring about improvements. In terms of where do we want to be and how do we do it, yeah, I think that can be somewhat combined, because ultimately it's where we are now. Where do we want to be? Those two can cross over. Naveed, I know you wanted to come in.
Just to clarify, the selection of the officers that are listed on the bottom of, I'm not sure if it's page 6 or page 14 that we're referring to here, but under the section 3, evidence and inquiry, those 3 areas, so children's, adults and housing, are our high volume areas. So they're the ones that are the most demanding in terms of regular data and quite complex data in terms of the requirements from the service. So they weren't sent in exhaustive list, and I absolutely understand that you would want to get a broader picture, which is completely understandable. But for just as a kind of starter for 10 almost, they would probably provide you with the best insight into what we do and how we do it and how it gets used. But I completely take the point from members that, yeah, it would be worthwhile broadening that out. Yeah,
and I think part of this is to work out who is the audience we want to have this. We want the data to be presented to. For my mind, it's not so much as how do we get your team to give data to different departments. It's around how do we filter that up so that effectively senior management team have a view of data across the council, rather than each of the service areas being the requester or demander of the data. For me, these are the teams and departments should feed it in. Whoever puts it all together, so that the people that run the council know what's going on and can fairly make the strategic decisions to influence that. Councillor Andy?
2 points. I think under the initial lines of inquiry there's lots of points around data, and I think there's mention of tech as well. But I think one of the things we need to be aware of is it's also people, because you've got the data side of it, the tech side of it, but you need people, and that's from 2 aspects of one is what are staff's attitude towards data and working with data, the importance of data, and secondly, the skills as well. So I think there's one of the point, performance culture within LBH, but I think it's more to do with data being used in appraisals, not the attitude to data. And I think the people side of thing is also important when you're looking at making the most of the data. Is point number one. Point number two was under the terms of reference, the where do we want to be? I think we need to be aware that there's a lot that needs to be done, that we can do, and we probably need to think about it more of in a phased approach of what we could do realistically in a year, 2 years, and then longer term to get to where we want to get to. Because in an ideal world, you'd be doing predictive analytics to forecast what's going to happen. But if you're not already looking at what's happening before to be able to do the BI, you can't really do the predictive analytics. So, yeah, just those 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for everyone's input on that. I think that's useful. We've got plenty to take away from that. I'll work with you, Liz, to follow up on a number of those to beef this up, to be specific around which other officers we can bring in to use for the evidence and inquiry, and how we can combine some of those to make it fit across all of the meetings. Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to suggest that it could come from all, even finance, but also kind of what was resident services. So that there are lots of areas there where data could be very useful, whether it's green spaces or refuse collection. There's lots and lots of information there which one could obtain.
Yeah, no, in agreement with that. Okay, so everyone happy to note that as the scoping report to take forward? Thank you. Maybe thanks very much. Agenda item 6 is the 2022-23 budget planning report for services within the remit of the Corporate Finance and Property Select Committee. So joined by Ian tonight. Thank you for coming. I know you're a regular at the committees, so grateful if you can talk us through what you're presenting to us tonight, and then I'm sure we'll have a number of questions following that.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is the first appearance by Finance at this Select Committee for the current year's budget setting cycle. At the moment, the paper is covering effectively a broad outline of the financial position and just a quick update on the process, which is broadly similar to that in previous years around setting the budget. And then either myself or probably with some colleagues as well, will be back in January 2022 to present the Cabinet's more detailed budget proposals once those are in place, and really sort of open the floor to questions on those proposals from the committee. What I was just briefly going to mention just now, but don't worry, I won't read out the report or anything just now, is the financial context in terms of where we are on the general fund, and I'll briefly mention our housing revenue account and schools budget as they do impact on the wider financial position. So in terms of the Council's general fund, so the two kind of key headlines in the report are we're dealing with COVID-19, the financial impact of COVID-19, and there's also what you might call the structural budget gap, so the idea that there is growing demand for services out there and funding, particularly from government, doesn't grow at the same rate, so we've got this gap that needs to be bridged. So in line with the position we presented to Cabinet and Council back in February, at the time the budget was set for the current year, we estimate that there's a budget gap of around 20 million, which is about 8% of the Council's net operating budget over the next 4 years. So compared to some of the budget gaps we've dealt with in previous years, it's not necessarily the largest budget gap we've ever dealt with, but obviously we're dealing with that in the context of coming out of a pandemic, so that adds additional challenges to the budget setting process this year. In terms of COVID-19 itself, so to date the Council, our projections to the end of the current financial year, our projections to the end of the current financial year are that the cost of managing the pandemic and its impact on things like our local revenue streams have been around £48 million. So in the context of our sort of £230 million annual turnover in the general fund, it's a substantial sum. Around 30 million of those pressures fell in the old financial year, and in the current financial year we're forecasting around 15 million. So you can see that the direct financial impact of COVID is tailing off already. Most of those pressures in the old year was seen in social care, where we saw changing demand, and particularly as the health sector was responding to the pandemic. And also we saw losses in our sales fees and charges for things like parking, when obviously people were not using town centres in quite the same way. In terms of sales fees and charges and some of the other service impacts, those are tailing off a lot quicker, but obviously social care, we're expecting there to be almost a long tail in terms of costs that the council needs to deal with. As we see that, that's a national issue, it's a challenge that we're facing most councils. We're eagerly awaiting things like the spending review in the autumn from the Treasury to understand what's out there in terms of government funding to help us through that. And I should say that to date, all our COVID pressures have been covered by central government grants, so we've not yet dipped into our own resources to respond to the pandemic. However, the council does have £10 million set aside specifically to manage any pressures that the government funding is not sufficient to meet. So that was all I was going to mention up front on the general fund. In terms of the housing revenue account, the major sort of changes that will be in the budget that will be presented later in the year will be the inclusion of the regeneration schemes, which obviously represent a significant additional investment in that area. And those will be fed through the business plan, but broadly speaking, the housing revenue account remains in robust financial health and is able to support that investment. And then finally, just to mention, obviously we still have the challenge on the dedicated schools grant, where we're seeing demand for SEND high needs placements outstripping funding from government, which dating back to the Children's Act back in 2014, where the eligibility criteria were changed without funding necessarily catching up. The council is working with the Department for Education on a recovery plan, and broadly speaking, the budget for this year should hopefully reflect the measures being taken to bring that fund back into balance in the medium to longer term. So finally, just to wrap up, so as I say, we'll be the first sort of formal presentation of the budget will be Cabinet approving their budget proposals in December, at which point we'll be back to discuss those in detail. But I suppose just if there are any questions, I can field those today.
Happy to open up for questions. Councillor Bliss.
Well, it's actually more of a comment than a question. On the housing revenue account, I mean, it's admirable that there's sort of new homes being built and estate regeneration schemes, but the reality is that not enough money has been pumped into maintaining the estates that already exist. And if you could see the state of some of them, paint peeling off the ceilings, paint peeling off the walls, nothing done for over 30 years. And I just wish that some more money could go into actually making the estates nicer places to live.
Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a couple of points. One, if I may, relates to the schools budget and the DSG. My understanding that even with the recovery plan, the risk is that the deficit's going to increase, at least in the short term, because there will be more pumping money in to try and arrange for early help for some children to try and reduce the numbers who end up with an education and healthcare plan. But perhaps more importantly, I do worry about the risks of inflation. I gather, I can't really tell because I don't know what the total budget is, but it seems to me that the provision made is something between 2.5% and 4%, I guess. But we're now talking about a possible 3% increase being offered to NHS staff, and it seems to me that social care will be roughly at the same level, if not perhaps a bit more. So there is a risk, I think, there. The other, leading on from that, of course, is interest rates. At the moment, our borrowings, I guess, are based on very low interest rates, and the risk is that certainly in the short to medium term, there could be increases in bank in the minimum lending rates, or whatever it's called nowadays. So I think presumably those will be taken into account when you get to the autumn, by which time we will understand whether there's going to be the national insurance increase for employers as well, which would be another 1%. All look forward to.
Yes, so we constantly sort of monitor sort of the inflation and interest rate risk positions. So we've so at the minute, obviously, as you say, rates are on both in terms of both inflation and interest rates are at historically low levels. We have seen a slight upturn in recent months after almost historically low levels during 2020. However, the forecasts we're seeing from economic advisors and our own sort of treasury advisors indicate that these rates are expected to stay at the kind of levels they are at the minute for at least in the medium term for the next sort of two to 3 years. So we're not, although we are keeping an eye on that risk, we're comfortable at the moment in terms of the estimates are sort of pegged at a reasonable level. But as you say, throughout the autumn, we will keep an eye on this and feed in.
Thank you. Ian, I just wanted to ask, I know you mentioned that the funding we received, sort of, I call it COVID-related funding, has covered our costs on that. Do we have any view in terms of how long that is likely to continue? As in, what time period are we committed to in terms of, are we going to receive anything more? How long is that going to last us for? Or is there a sort of drop-dead date on it that after a certain point in time, though that fund that we've set aside ourselves will then be sort of utilised?
Yeah, of course. So the funding throughout the pandemic, the funding we've received has been somewhat stop-start in terms of we'd get funding for the next 3 months, we get funding for the next 6 months. So at the minute, a number of most of our funding streams are effectively sort of, we're not expecting new funding announcements for the current year. So we're not expecting any new money for the current year unless there are changes that mean that potentially a new lockdown, not to jinx anything, if that's the way to put it. But so if there's changes in circumstances, we expect further funding to come through. But we're comfortable at the minute that the funding we've received to date will see us through to the end of the financial year. We're not anticipating any new COVID-19 funding, so if that comes through, that will support our position and help us sort of support local residents.
Okay, thank you. And if we were to use any of that fund that we've utilised and then received further COVID funding, presumably we could replenish our own funds with that.
Yes, yeah. We would look to. We'd need to confirm sort of detailed grant conditions as and when they came through. But yeah, we'd expect effectively we see that £10 million in a way as our funding that's set aside so that we can, as an authority, respond in the event that we need to, and in the hope that the government actually will recognise the cost pressure and therefore reimburse the council when appropriate.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any more questions? Councillor Graham.
Yes, Chairman. The medium-term financial forecast timetable is an annual one, and obviously we will have an overview of this, but I'm just hoping that it will come to us in stages. There's a 12-month timetable. I'm just hoping it'll come to us in stages whereby we can look at it more closely than perhaps is intended in this report.
So Councillor, the report at the minute was intended to be a sort of initial overview of the financial position. Until we get through to December, we won't have sort of the cabinet budget proposals ready for wider discussion. However, if there are particular aspects of the budget that there's anything that we can provide additional information, or if there's any particular queries we can address, then sort of we're here to assist.
Okay, thank you. If no more questions, then is everyone happy to note the report presented by Ian? Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you.
Takes us to agenda item 7. Gary, thank you for joining us this evening. So we're looking at disability access in buildings. I know you're not named on the report, and I know Councillor Edgington just had a question around the details of it in advance from the minutes. Just hopefully you can talk us through it briefly. Reading the paper, it looked quite light in terms of it was mainly around sort of theory and legislation. I think we're probably keen to understand how do we actually apply this to our buildings, and by that I'm probably looking at buildings that we use for residents in terms of libraries, housing, leisure centres. And when we talk about disability, I think to understand what are we talking about there, are we covering wheelchair access, blind people, probably a range of things. So I just wanted to sort of preempt that depending what you were going to say, if that's okay.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Dave Grimshaw. Yeah, the report was prepared at the committee's request, and the officers are working closely with the Principal Access Officer, who's a National Register of Access Consultants, and we're confident that we are covering all compliancy issues to all our buildings. That's physical and visual aids. We've got from the report, we've got no residents' request for additional arrangements, and all of our buildings, libraries, have been checked. As I say, apologies. It's a little bit of a light report, but it's just generally, I think it's on the basis that we haven't got any real issues to report. It's quite we've got quite a good relationship. Issues raised, our teams then work with the Principal Access Officer and our health and safety teams, so we resolve the issues on our work plans.
Thank you. Happy to take members' questions. I can't remember where this generated from, but I would be of the understanding that there were specific issues that people probably had awareness of that would have brought it to us. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, okay, Councillor Bliss. Sorry, can you put your microphone on, please? Thanks.
Yeah, myself and Tony actually had to look up what a protected characteristic meant. That's not a term that I think a lot of people are really know what it means.
Okay, thank you. Gary, just in terms of, just thinking earlier where we talked about housing and regeneration, so where we have this Principal Access Officer, would they be involved in stages of that, just to make sure that accessibility to housing and buildings is considered, and what disabilities do they consider? Or presumably all of them, but what encompasses that really?
Point in question. I mean, we've undertaken quite a lot of work on the mezz floor of the building, converting it, and the officer's been involved in all of those arrangements, assessing access, giving advice on areas for improvement. He's given us some advice that the team are working to at the moment about the evacuation roles, which for disabled staff and measures. CCT, fire evacuation in lift lobbies being monitored by our security teams. We also raised the mini courtyard outside our members' car park. There's some level differences, so all of those issues are being picked up and addressed by the facilities team as part of our work programs. So they've got a really good working relationship. If there's an issue, then we are actively involved in resolving.
Okay, so by work program, we're involved in, or your team are involved in defects, and if something has become unaccessible for disabled access, they get into that and sort of repair it and get it back to full accessibility, really. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. There's one issue. When the works are completed to the main mezz floor, there's an item there on the ramp leading to the Middlesex suite, which is already on our forward plan to make sure that's fully compliant. It's some issues were raised around the block paving. Again, that's pointing and resurfacing. We don't want to do that while work operatives are taking place and there's heavy machinery in and out, so it'll be done after the fact. And the gradient, they've raised a gradient on the same ramp is currently non-compliant, so we will be doing works to deal with that area. Again, it's all about improving access, signage, ensuring that it's available to all.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments? Councillor Edgington?
Yes. The one, well, so there are a number of issues which we aren't compliant with at the moment. And what sort of, there are a couple of questions I've got. One is, what sort of timescale are those going to be sorted out?
The items listed have already been discussed with the team, and as soon as the main works programme are completed, then the maintenance items come in almost straight away. So then it'll be finishing off the estate, mainly on the civic centre site, and then we'll finish it straight after. So they're built into our works programmes. So it'll follow on immediately. As I say, you'll see there's quite a lot of operatives moving around on the mez floor. So we've got a lot of work going on, and we don't want to waste work by completing it before everyone's finished, really. But generally, the stock is in good order. As I say, we've had no real issues other than a few minor tweaks that we need to make for the civic centre and the Middlesex suite.
Thank you. Could I ask another question? Are you responsible for the amenity site in Harefield? Is that compliant, or?
We do have a report on the site, and Dave's leaning on a project where we've got to change or undertake. It's just been actually approved by Cabinet. Undertake some works to one of the loading sort of platform areas where the concrete floor, for want of a better word, needs to be replaced. It's got a significant dip, just again because of the heavy vehicles and heavy digging equipment. That is on our work programme. Now it's approved. We're starting the process for planning, because there's going to be a lot of issues around arranging access to that area to prevent traffic impact. So it's going to be quite an extensive project, and will involve all the parties on that, just to minimise disruption.
Carry on, yeah.
And a final one. I presumably you're not responsible for green spaces and access there, or?
No, no. I'm responsible for all the repairs and engineering functions and facilities management, so I will be reporting.
Okay, well, on the Hillingdon Trail, which I occasionally go on bits and pieces, there are a number of stiles, and those seem to be particularly tricky for anybody, but anybody who had any disability would find them impossible, I think. I don't know whether those could be looked at.
Sorry, just microphone on, please.
I do apologise. Yeah, I will check those with the head of that service and see if he's got. They normally deal with the maintenance on fields, walk paths, and grassed areas.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Harangi, thank you.
Quick question. So it sounds, as it says in the report, there's no major concerns, and if something arises, it's dealt with as a work programme, and there's no complaints or MEs that have been raised. My question is, do we proactively look at new techniques, new things that could be done to enhance? So, it sounds as if anything comes up, we deal with it, but do we look at new, things, that could be done to enhance the... Yeah,
in the civic centre last year we replaced the access control, so that's rather than forcing doors open, all the doors are on push button fob access. So we're generally looking to improve access to our buildings. Libraries are just undergoing some works as well, but generally a lot of the access arrangements were already in place, so it's about making sure that we do maintain those. If there are improvements, then, as I say, one of the big projects we did last year was the civic centre and arranging easy access for all.
Okay, thank you very much. Go around one more time, anyone? No? Lovely, Gary, thank you very much for coming to cover that for us this evening. Thank you. So that then brings us on to agenda item 8, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan, and we have an updated version printed out hopefully is on everyone's desk. Anything anyone would like to ask, note or raise around this? Yeah, Councillor Edginson?
Yes, it's to do with the licence deficit budgets for the 3 schools. I think Oakwood's, the deficit is coming down, but the other 2, there's Holy Trinity and Bishop Winnington.
Can I just check which item?
That is 076, which is on the Cabinet Members meeting, the 2nd of September. And really, I can't see ways in which some of those are going to be resolved, but and there's always a risk, as there was with Oakwood, or as it was Abbotswood, where there were very large deficits being accumulated without any sort of control, and that puts the rest of the schools, to maintain schools, at risk.
Okay, thank you. I think the report deadline for that is the 18th of August, so I would assume any contributions or sight of that would come before that. Otherwise, it's probably a case of seeing what the Cabinet paper comes out as. Any other questions? Are we happy to note that? Councillor Edginson?
Just one other thing. The digital connectivity strategy, I don't know whether it's possible for us to see an early copy of that. We're talking about deadline August, mid-August, but we aren't meeting for some time, I believe, until after that meeting.
Yes, I think from memory that is on our work programme around that. Just jump to the other item. Council's digital strategy and future plans is something that we have later in this year, but we can certainly see if we can get early sights of that, Liz, if we can speak to the officers around that before that goes to Cabinet. If that can get circulated to members, then we have visibility of that as soon as possible. Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 9 is our work programme. So as we looked at through the review, we've got quite a number of witnesses or a number of areas to cover within the review across the next couple of sessions. Obviously no meeting in August, but the September, October, November meetings will be heavily focused on that. September meeting, we also have the annual complaints update, which is a regular item that comes for us, as well as an information on information governance and cyber security. So that's what we have coming in the September meeting. Just to clarify, sorry, the October meeting, the date of this 21st of October, that is a change from when the whole year programme was determined. Apologies, that's inconvenience caused by me, I'm afraid. But that, hopefully that date still works for most people, but just confirming October is Thursday the 21st. Anyone have any questions on that? Councillor Edginson?
Yeah, I was going to ask whether it would be possible to bring the website upgrade performance, because we're delaying it until January, and it seems a long way off, and I think that has been raised at least in various committees I've had, whether we could bring that forward, because the witness session on the 7th of September seems to be relatively short at the moment.
Yeah, I think for that, my initial view is that 7th of September one, I'd like to get the guy who's the external consultant into that one as well, that first one. Whether we can whether we can bring that forward to there, or if we can bring it forward to the November one, where hopefully by the November meeting, by the time we're at findings, it's between ourselves rather than relying on external witnesses. I think those first two, I think where we've got external people, probably keep it to that. But if we can bring the website one forward to November, I would like to see if we can do that, because yeah, I know it's been raised, yeah, by different committees, different people, both sides. It's an acknowledged challenge. I think it's fair. So yeah, happy for that to be looked at.
It'd be helpful to try and get it done.
Okay, thank you very much. If no one has anything else, then we can finish at 8:15. Thanks very much.